Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear friends, a warm welcome to all of you to the International Environment House here in Geneva. For those of you who are joining us for the second part of today's celebration. And can I just say what a fantastic breakfast we have had and what an engaging forum we have had. And I want to thank again our hosts, Switzerland, the Canton of Geneva and the City of Geneva, as well as all of you and the organizations that have joined us to make this forum what it is, a unique place to engage on World Environment Day. Again, a very, very happy World Environment Day. This year, the message for the world's biggest platform for environmental action carries a powerful message. It's time to put an end to plastic pollution. For decades, plastic pollution has infiltrated every corner of the world. Our water, our food, the air we breathe, it can even be now found within us. In 2025, the world is expected to consume 516 million tons of plastic, with only 9% of all plastic produced being recycled globally, and recycling alone is not enough to solve the problem. But we can unite to unleash innovative solutions that tackle the life cycle of plastics, solutions that allow for alternatives to be deployed, solutions that rethink how products are designed and how we make, use, and reuse plastics. Indeed, a comprehensive circular economy approach could reduce the volume of plastics entering our oceans, for example, by over 80% and save governments $70 billion between 2021 and 2040. So there is also a very strong economic argument to end plastic pollution. But we all have a unique role. We all have a role to play in ending plastic pollution. Plastic pollution, of course, is only one aspect of the triple planetary crisis, which threatens every facet of life on Earth. The challenge of climate change, biodiversity loss, and land loss and pollution. And of course, this is the key mandate for UNEP that we pursue here in Geneva and beyond in collaboration with member states and our partners. On World Environment Day, we are all invited to stop and think of what we can do to make our tomorrow better and greener. Do I need every bit of single-use plastic that I use in my daily life? How can I avoid it? In August, negotiations will take place here in Geneva to finalize a treaty on plastics. History not only could be in the making, history must be made in August here in Geneva. While the Republic of Korea is our global host for World Environment Day in 2025, International Geneva also plays a key role in celebrating this day, not least through our Geneva Environment Network. Today, you may wish to head down to Cinerama tonight to see a Cine ONU screening of the stunning and thought-provoking film Nature, directed by UNEP Goodwill Ambassador Yann Arthus-Bertrand. There will also be, for the first time, a World Environment Day concert here in Geneva, which is taking place at the Victoria Hall this evening and which is organized in partnership with the Orchestre des Nations. And don't forget to check out the symbolic jet d'eau lighting up in green later today. Coming back to the International Environment House and the Geneva Environment Network, this morning, the World Environment Day Forum showcased how International Geneva is collectively acting to beat plastic pollution. And many actors here in Geneva are actively working to address the plastic crisis at the global and local levels. As a hub for environmental governance, Geneva plays an important role in all of this. The forum highlighted Geneva's unique expertise on environmental issues, chemicals and waste governance, biodiversity, health, human rights, trade, and many other relevant areas of work, spotlighting the contributions of so many actors to end plastic pollution. I want to thank the GEN team, again, for organizing the events here today and also for co-moderating this dialogue. And if we are gathered here in person and online today, it is thanks to our host country, Switzerland, whom we sincerely thank for the continued and indispensable support to UNEP's work, to GEN, but also to the international environmental agenda. And of course, we are very, very grateful to Switzerland for being UNEP's host here in Geneva, for hosting UNEP's regional office for Europe and Central Asia, many multilateral environmental agreement secretariats, and other UNEP teams here in Geneva. So without further ado, it is now my pleasure to invite His Excellency Ambassador Felix Wertli, who is Switzerland's Ambassador for the Environment, and he's also head of the International Affairs Division at the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. Felix, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arnold. Excellencies, colleagues, friends. First, I would like to thank UNEP and the GEN for opening its door for the Partners and Stakeholder Forum and for organizing this high-level dialogue to highlight Geneva's collective efforts to tackle plastic pollution. I'd also like to thank our friends from Korea for organizing, hosting the Global World Environment Day and putting this important topic of plastic pollution forward. It is truly inspiring to see so many actors engaged in addressing environmental issues here in International Geneva. The forum has truly demonstrated how International Geneva brings people together, how it creates powerful synergies and boosts ambition to advance the Beat Plastic Pollution agenda. You all know it. We are at the historical moment. In August, we will meet again in Geneva for the next round of negotiations for the INC 5.2 that will take place in the Palais des Nations here in Geneva. This meeting offers a unique opportunity to reach an agreement on a global legally binding treaty to end plastic pollution. Switzerland is honored to host this pivotal session and will ensure that the best possible conditions for negotiations are provided. I would like to focus on 3 points that I consider to be relevant for a successful conclusion of negotiations, that is commitment, effectiveness, and collaboration. On the commitment, it is clear. The goal of the meeting in August, the goal of the INC 5.2, is to conclude the negotiations and to agree to an effective treaty. If this is not achieved in August, we may miss our chance. We have committed ourselves as an international community to address plastic pollution and to find sustainable solutions. We are ready to listen to the socio-economic concerns and to find suitable solutions. However, a meaningful treaty is a treaty that addresses all stages of the plastic life cycle. We must deliver now, and we're counting on all countries to contribute. On effectiveness, we need a treaty that provides a clear path forward for all parties, offering flexibility where necessary, but also being effective enough to address the urgency of the problem. We need a treaty that is delivering results. This means an effective treaty with globally legally binding obligation across the full life cycle of plastics and a robust implementation mechanism that drives change around the world. Reducing and eliminating problematic plastic products, including chemicals of concern, enhancing transparency along the various value chains, and scaling up circular solutions are key elements for the future treaty. On the third point, collaboration. We are talking about a multifaceted challenge. Plastic pollution affects human health and the environment. It is linked to human rights, trade, and labor questions. Looking at the stakeholders present in Geneva, such as WHO, WTO, UNEP's Chemics and Waste Cluster, the Beers Convention, or the ILO, this underlines the unique institutional setting of International Geneva. It is a setting that is not only contributing to negotiations, but will be crucial to support the implementation of the treaty. Colleagues, friends, we have the science, the political momentum, and the platform in Geneva. However, we all know the success at INC 5.2 will depend on our collective willingness to compromise, build bridges, and on political will. With the support and active engagement of all stakeholders, we can deliver a treaty that will truly beat plastic pollution, and we can achieve this together in August in Geneva. I will hand over back to you, Arnold, to listen to other panelists, to hear their views, how we have to tackle plastic challenge. And I think this will be an illustration how diverse the problem is, but also how diverse solutions can be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for these important works and for a reminder what's at stake in August and that solutions are at hand if there is the collective will to implement them. I would now ask the team to please play two important video messages for us. The first one from the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres.
This World Environment Day focuses on solutions to beat plastic pollution, and rightly so. Plastic pollution is choking our planet, harming ecosystems, well-being and the climate. Plastic waste clogs rivers, pollutes the ocean and endangers wildlife. And it breaks down into smaller and smaller parts. It infiltrates every corner of Earth, from the top of Mount Everest to the depths of the ocean, from human brains to human breast milk. Yet there is a movement for urgent change. We are seeing mounting public engagement, steps towards reusability and greater accountability, and policies to reduce single-use plastics and improve waste management. But we must go further, faster. In 2 months, countries will come together to hammer out a new global treaty to end plastic pollution. We need an ambitious, credible and just agreement this year, one that covers the life cycle of plastic through the perspective of circular economies, that responds to the needs of communities, that aligns with broader environmental goals, the Sustainable Development Goals and beyond, and that is implemented fast and in full. I urge negotiators to return to talks in August, determined to build a common path through their differences and deliver the treaty our world needs. Together, let's end the scourge of plastic pollution and build a better future for us all. Thank you.
Following the remarks by the Secretary General of the UN, I would now invite the team to play the remarks from the Executive Director of UNEP, Inga Andersen.
Plastic pollution impacts every ecosystem and every person on this planet. By 2040, plastic leakage to the environment is predicted to grow by 50%. And that pollution creeps into our bodies through the food we eat, the water we drink, and even the air that we breathe. But we can unleash and unite to unleash innovative solutions. Solutions that tackle the life cycle of plastics, solutions that enable the deployment of alternatives and ultimately drive down plastic pollution leaking into our environment. Solutions that rethink how products are designed and how we make, use and reuse plastics, and solutions that help protect our health, our environment and our communities. The world is closing in on a global treaty to end plastic pollution. So, on World Environment Day, let's all recommit to beat plastic pollution once and for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, with these two important messages in mind, we are now moving into the formal opening of this high-level dialogue, which very much is under the theme From Busan to Geneva, Securing a Global Treaty to End Plastic Pollution. And the Republic of Korea is not only the host of this year's World Environment Day celebrations, but Busan in the Republic of Korea was also the host of the negotiations to establish a legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution in December of last year. And so it's my great pleasure that Her Excellency Ambassador Sang Yo-joy could join us today. And it is my pleasure to now give you, Ambassador, the floor to formally open this high-level dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, it's our great pleasure to join you today at this high-level dialogue marking World Environment Day. I extend my sincere appreciation to the Geneva Environment Network for organizing this timely and meaningful gathering here in Geneva. Earlier today, this important occasion was also commemorated on Jeju Island in the Republic of Korea. It is heartening to see our shared commitment to environmental stewardship clearly demonstrated across continents on the same day and with a common purpose. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the many Geneva-based international organizations that have contributed to the preparation for this year's World Environment Day. The Republic of Korea first hosted World Environment Day back in 1997 in Seoul under the theme of For the Life on Earth. Nearly 3 decades later, we convened again in Jeju, this time in the context of far more complex and far-reaching environmental challenges. The realities of plastic pollution have become impossible to ignore. According to UNEP's 2023 report, Turning Off the Tap, microplastics have been discovered in the deepest parts of the ocean, in pristine mountain glaciers, in breast milk, and even within human bodies. The annual social and environmental cost of black plastic pollution ranges between 300 and 600 billion US dollars. This is no longer a distant or abstract issue. It poses a direct threat to ecosystems, public health, and human dignity. This year's theme, Beat Plastic Pollution, resonates strongly with the realities we are confronting across the globe. It underscores the urgent need for 1, international solidarity, 2, practical solutions, and 3, inclusive public participation, the 3 key focus areas of 2025 World Environment Day. I would like to highlight 2 points in this regard. First, we must accelerate efforts to develop a comprehensive and legally binding global agreement on plastic pollution, supported by strong political will. 2 years ago, at the UN Environment Assembly, we took an historic step together by adopting a resolution to develop an instrument on plastic pollution. Although the 5th session in Busan last year could not deliver the outcomes we had hoped for, it laid vital groundwork for the upcoming negotiations. We are hopeful that the upcoming second part of the session here in Geneva this August will deliver concrete and ambitious outcomes. Second, we must recognize that governments alone cannot address this crisis. A whole of society approach is essential, one that mobilizes international organizations, local and regional authorities, the private sector, civil society, and individuals. We must leverage the innovative capacity of industry, the engagement of informed and empowered citizens, and the policy leadership of cities and communities. Only through inclusive, multi-level partnerships can we achieve the systemic change needed to address the full life cycle of plastics as we have committed to doing. In closing, Korea will continue to support the international community in achieving meaningful outcomes in tackling plastics pollution and in ensuring a sustainable future for generations to come. I look forward to the ideas and partnerships that will emerge from today's dialogue and to the meaningful progress we can achieve together. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Just a technical note here for who is still standing up. There are still 3 chairs here on our left, so don't hesitate to come and sit for those who are still standing up. As you have heard, with the 5th session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee resuming in Geneva in August, this year's World Environment Day celebration in Geneva is a good opportunity to highlight how the international Geneva multilateral diplomacy system is collectively taking action to tackle plastic pollution and supporting the establishment of a treaty to end plastic pollution. We are joined for the panel discussion that we are starting now by leading experts actively engaged in addressing the plastic crisis in different processes. Many of our guests are co-conveners or have spoken at one or more sessions of the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues that we launched almost 5 years ago now. These dialogues have served as a platform to encourage increased engagement of the Geneva community and actors across the world in the run-up to the various global environmental negotiations related to plastics, and of course to the INC process itself. 5 years ago, scientists were telling us that wherever we search for plastics, we find them. We now know that there is no place on Earth which is left untouched by plastic pollution, as Her Excellency reminded us in her opening remarks. Since we launched these dialogues, there has been more and more evidence on how exposure to plastics is impacting our health. And our last dialogue 3 weeks ago addressed health on the negotiating table, analyzing the INC chair's text that will serve as a basis for the negotiation that is taking place here in Geneva in August. So we will start reflecting on how Multilateral Geneva is collectively acting to beat plastic pollution with the World Health Organization. We are joined by Kate Robertson, who is a legal expert in the Department of Health Promotion. We will hear from her. She will bring here the health perspective and what is needed to ensure an effective and meaningful plastics treaty, and how this expertise we have here can contribute to the implementation of the future treaty. As I give Mrs. Robertson the floor, I'm also introducing this little thing that I have here on my desk. It's the miniature of the artwork that we are using today. It's the artwork that will be on Place des Nations during the INC negotiation in August. And this will serve to pass the baton among our panel members. The artist who has made who will be making the artwork is called Benjamin Van Wang. You might know him. He has been present at various environmental negotiations with artworks, including with that Close the Tap in Nairobi at UNEA 5.2 when the resolution was adopted. So there's also a stand outside where you could see if you want to get involved, because he's looking for people to get involved in building this artwork, you can engage. There is a hashtag, QR code outside, everything that you need to know to help with that. So with that, if you look a little bit closer, you will see that there are a lot of reference to health in here. It's very prominent. It's a call to action on plastic pollution to protect health. So with that, Mrs. Robertson, I'm giving you the baton and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today before this great group and for a very impressive baton, which I'll put down here. In terms of, from the WHO perspective, how we see a strong protections for health through the treaty. First, it's really pleasing to see that there is general consensus around protection of human health as a core treaty objective. For us, that's a very important point. And we would also, as His Excellency, the Ambassador for Switzerland has pointed out, we would urge a comprehensive approach, given the impacts on health and the risks to health that arise at all stages of the plastic life cycle. We'd also recommend in the treaty an approach which mandates consideration of health risks and issues and where relevant health benefits in all relevant provisions of the treaty, so that health issues are consistently considered as a factor under treaty decisions and in treaty implementation. We would also be supportive of a strong health-specific clause which could apply in addition to the obligations throughout the treaty related to health and consideration of health risks, as this could actually require development of strategies and capacities that are specific to health risks and impacts and their prevention and mitigation, and also to human exposures. As we've said at previous INCs, WHO doesn't support a blanket exemption for medical products or for health. There's a lot of plastic pollution from the health supply chain, which can and should be reduced, and a number of important initiatives underway in order to do that. But we would propose that special consideration would need to be given to health products in certain circumstances, where, for example, a ban or a phase-out is proposed. to allow time to meet clinical safety and quality requirements for feasible alternatives. Another way in which we see an important protection for health under the treaty is the inclusion of health protections under the provisions on transparency, on tracking, on monitoring, labelling and information exchange. The consistent inclusion of health as a consideration under these clauses, the required disclosure and information sharing on potential health risks and harms, the inclusion of health and biomonitoring data, including exposures in reporting, would all be helpful to provide strong and effective protections for health and to ensure that health risks and safety risks are not considered to be confidential or somehow not shared in situations where there are risks to health that are imminent. In terms of the second part of the question, how the expertise in Geneva can contribute to the implementation of the future treaty, as has been mentioned by all of the previous speakers, there's a great deal of expertise and a great number of institutions in Geneva, which can be very, very helpful for collaboration, to provide forums for discussions and for sharing of information and discussion between member states. And really important that in implementing the treaty, that member states aren't thinking they have to start from scratch, that there are a number of really important existing expertise, as I mentioned, but also mechanisms and initiatives in place that can be very useful toward the treaty implementation. So, for example, health experts, including WHO and our advisory groups, and also independent scientists and others, could have a core role in the development of criteria and assessment methodologies, particularly around chemicals and human health, to help guide decisions on health products and on alternatives and replacements for existing products, and to foster and promote innovation. There are also a number of existing standard-setting mechanisms in place. For example, the WHO expert committees and advisory groups that develop norms, standards, and specifications for health products. And as I mentioned, a number of existing initiatives and guidance on things like collection and reporting of health-related data, evaluation of health risks, disposal and management of healthcare waste, and also food labelling and packaging in the context of codex. But to finish, overall, I think that what Geneva provides most importantly, and I think today is an excellent example, is a forum for collaboration for all of the institutions in the room and also all of the member states that are present here. So thanks again for the opportunity. Pass back to Dana, or pass the baton to my right.
You will hear soon.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robertson, and for this insightful remarks. May I kindly ask you to pass the baton to the next speaker, Juliette Kohler, whom I will have the pleasure to introduce. So Ms. Kohler is the Senior Legal Officer and Chief of the Governance Branch of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. Welcome and thank you for joining us. As you may all know, less than a month ago, the BRS Conventions convened their largest conference of the parties so far and adopted a series of bold decisions to advance the sound management of chemicals and waste, including plastic waste. To implement each of the three conventions and their decisions, and to fulfill its mission to protecting human health and the environment from the adverse effect of hazardous chemicals and waste, the BRS provides member states and stakeholders with proactive and solution-oriented support to make the invisible visible. Let me also note that the BRS Conventions are one of the co-conveners of the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues since the first series launched in 2020. So, drawing on your long-standing experience in international environmental law, Ms. Kohler, we would like then to hear from you what, in your perspective, is needed to ensure an effective and meaningful plastics treaty, and how can the expertise in Geneva contribute to the implementation of the future treaty? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having the BRS Conventions joining you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and friends. To answer these questions, our proposal is that to guide the way forward, it is valuable to look at what is happening now already and today. And so I will be focusing on the contributions of the BRS Conventions through action on the ground, as it has already been unfolding. Much of the harm caused by plastic pollution remains invisible. From toxic additives and microplastics to mismanage waste in vulnerable communities or ecosystems away from the spotlight. Addressing these hidden threats requires legally binding frameworks and concrete implementation support to parties. The international community is facing a defining environmental challenge of our time, with pervasive, persistent, and deeply intertwined with chemicals and waste management. The Basel Convention has long addressed the transboundary movement of plastic waste as a particular vehicle to protect human health and the environment from its hazards and to ensure environmentally sound management. The 2019 plastic waste amendments make previously unregulated trade in plastic waste more transparent, traceable, and controllable, a milestone in global efforts to curb plastic pollution. However, many parties still face challenges in implementing these amendments, including gaps in legislation, institutional frameworks, gaps in infrastructure and systems for the environmentally sound management of plastic waste, as well as limited capacity within customs authorities and enforcement officials. Another pressing and unrecognized issue is the presence of hazardous constituents in plastics, such as persistent organic pollutants, POPs. These include flame retardants, plasticizers, and other toxic additives that can leach into the environment and cause long-term health risks. Managing POPs in plastics is technically complex, often requiring advanced capacity for identification, separation, and environmentally sound disposal, as well as addressing challenges related to complex and fragmented supply chains. Responding to these challenges, the BRS Secretariat supports parties through targeted technical assistance, enabling real action on the ground and for many years. This includes legal and technical guidance on implementing the plastic waste amendments, development of national strategies and inventories to better monitor and manage plastic waste, and the promotion of environmentally sound management of plastic waste throughout its life cycle. Since the adoption of the plastic waste amendments in 2019, 76 countries have benefited from a total of 126 projects, supported by over $20 million in voluntary contributions from the European Union, from France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, and the USA, as well as private environmental funds such as the Norwegian Retailers Environment Fund. Support to parties is provided through the implementation of tailored pilot projects in different economic sectors, tourism, fisheries, retail, as well as educational programs and awareness raising, targeting prevention, minimization, and/or sound management of plastic wastes. The support to parties is directly provided by the Secretariat and through the Small Grants Program, SGP, on plastic waste, in collaboration with a network of 14 Basel Convention regional centers. And the support is also provided through the Plastic Waste Partnership. This partnership is an innovative multi-stakeholder platform. It brings together governments, industry, academia, civil society to identify good practices for the sound management of plastic waste and to identify solutions that can be scaled across the life cycle. Through the PWP, the partnership, a series of projects are being implemented on the ground with the objective, among others, to make visible the importance of plastic waste management through education and awareness raising, prevent plastic pollution and generation through introducing alternatives to plastics, improve segregation, collection, and recycling systems, and apply practical approaches to monitoring hazardous chemicals in plastic waste. The Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions are central to implementing science-based, legally binding controls that address both visible and invisible threats. As negotiations toward a global plastic treaty advance, The Secretariat stands ready to continue supporting parties' efforts on the ground through technical assistance and partnership. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Juliette, for these important reflections. I kindly ask Marine, our colleague, to pass on the baton to our next speaker, whom I have the pleasure to introduce. We would now like to welcome Michael Camilleri, Branch Chief of the Thematic Engagement of the Special Procedures and Right to Development Division at the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. There's overwhelming evidence that plastics across its life cycle threaten the full enjoyment of human rights, including the right to life, the right to health, and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. In particular, such threats disproportionately affect communities in vulnerable and marginalized situations, from health impacts of toxic exposure to broader implications for livelihoods, as well as impeded access to information and to remedy. With the presence of various human rights bodies and instruments, Geneva remains to be a global hub in ensuring human rights is at the forefront of the multilateral agenda. With bodies such as yours, including the Human Rights Office, underscore the need for a human rights-based approach to environmental governance. They underscore placing dignity, equality, and justice at the heart of international action. So, Mr. Camilleri, drawing from your experience, I would like to ask you, in your perspective, what is needed to ensure an effective and meaningful plastics treaty, and how can the expertise in Geneva contribute to the implementation of the future treaty? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, colleagues, friends, excellencies, good morning. As we've already heard this morning, the catastrophic impacts of unsustainable, unprincipled plastic production are undeniable and threaten our shared future. To be sure, plastic pollution touches every ecosystem on our planet. As we also heard, current patterns of plastic production, use, and disposal are causing a global human rights crisis with deadly impacts on human health and the environment. The global plastic pollution crisis is transboundary by nature. It demands legally binding provisions, not merely voluntary or nationally determined approaches. A treaty with binding obligations, mindful of the different development stages and capabilities of its parties, is therefore essential. INC 5.2 should prioritize outcomes that advance human rights. An ambitious treaty addressing the full life cycle of plastics will achieve this. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. Waste management alone cannot resolve this global crisis. So what would a plastics treaty that advances human rights include? Let me offer 7 concrete ideas. First, a just transition that upholds human rights and benefits people disproportionately affected by plastic production and pollution. Second, protecting the right to health through the control of chemicals of concern in plastics and assessing the human rights impact of plastic substitutes and alternatives, guarding against substitutions that could lead to further harm. Third, protecting the right to a healthy environment with reduction targets for plastic polymer production and the promotion of toxic-free upstream solutions like reuse that reduce supply and demand for plastics while addressing legacy pollution. Fourth, mandatory disclosure of health and safety information related to plastic production, as well as data on emissions, release of pollutants, and quantities of plastics produced, imported, and exported, consistent with the right to access to information. Fifth, access to justice for those who have suffered harms from transboundary impacts and legacy pollution, including by ensuring remediation and accountability. Sixth, equitable and affordable access by all states to environmentally sustainable technologies, while ensuring robust mechanisms to protect scientific inquiry against conflicts of interest and greenwashing. And finally, as the economic, social, and environmental impact of the plastic life cycle and the capacity to respond to it are not evenly distributed between countries, the establishment of a transparent and adequately resourced fund to support implementation of the treaty and ensure capacity building, technical assistance, and technology transfer. The Plastics Treaty can set a new standard by integrating human rights into its operational text. This would be a groundbreaking step, including increasing ambition and advancing a holistic and impactful outcome. Article 10, we would suggest, on the just transition, is the perfect landing place for this. A just transition is intrinsically grounded in human rights, including labor rights. Human rights are what makes the transition just, as illustrated by the phrase, "A transition without justice is just a transition," often attributed to labor leaders and trade unions that advocate for a just transition. Excellencies, friends, allow me to conclude with an important process point. Public participation in environmental governance is a cornerstone of democracy and human rights that ensures individuals, peoples, and communities can engage in decision-making processes that impact their health and environment. It is necessary that decisions are made in a transparent, inclusive, and accountable manner, with participation of those who will be affected by those decisions, and in an environment free of reprisals and respect for public freedoms, which are fundamental and should be protected at the international level. We count on your best efforts to ensure that the new treaty is aligned with the existing human rights framework and that states' obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights are reflected. This is essential for policy coherence and effectiveness. You can certainly count on OHCHR and our High Commissioner to remain engaged in this critical process. We wish you the best and urge you to seize this moment and deploy human rights solutions to prevent and respond to the harms caused by plastic pollution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Camilleri, for your insightful remarks. And yeah, thank you for passing the baton on to our next speaker, whom I have the pleasure to introduce, Daniela Garcia, Deputy Permanent Representative of Ecuador to the World Trade Organization. Daniela, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. Ecuador has shown huge commitment ending plastic pollution, being one of the leading countries calling for greater international cooperation to fight against plastic pollution and for the establishment of a plastic treaty. Ambassador Luis Vallas from Ecuador is the chair of the INC, and we will listen to his message later. As trade in plastics account for $1 trillion each year, representing 5% of the total value of merchandise trade, trade can and must play a key role in advancing the agenda to end plastic pollution. Drawing on your experience as the coordinator for the dialogue on plastic pollution at the WTO for Ecuador, I would like to hear your insights on the following questions. In your perspective, what is needed to ensure an effective and meaningful plastics treaty, and how can the expertise in Geneva contribute to the implementation of the future treaty? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Em, and thanks, Diana. You have an amazing team. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to Switzerland, Republic of Korea, and of course, UNEP, Jen we are happy to join this World Environment Day. And as Felix mentioned, but also Sonyu, it's very important to bear in mind that we need a collaborative efforts, and Soyun mentioned a whole of society approach. I would say also a whole of the international community approach, and we have quite an important international community and expertise here in Geneva. We have a lot of expertise and an important portion of that international community here today in this room to celebrate this very important day. And happy to hear all of colleagues and friends' contribution to this important goal to end plastic pollution. But I'm here to talk about the dialogue on plastic pollution at the WTO, and I will try to answer two of the questions you placed in one. So just to mention, the World Trade Organization based here in Geneva hosts since 2020, already 5 years, the dialogue on plastic pollution and environmentally sustainable plastics. We call it the DPLP, with now 83 members of the WTO. And this initiative is led by Australia, Barbados, China, Fiji, Morocco, and Ecuador, on whose behalf I'm here to present the dialogue today. It has grown from 12 members to 83 now, being the initiative that plurilaterally has the most members in the WTO, with members from all levels of development and all regions represented. Actually, more than 90% of the plastics trade is plastic production and trade is represented in the members of this dialogue. And all are participating with a clear goal to contribute to the fight, to fighting plastic pollution. It's been said that this is a dialogue that has a clearly environmental goal on how trade can contribute to this broader environmental objective. And to answer to your questions, this trade expertise and let's say trade policy are mutually supportive with environmental objectives. And as others have mentioned, trade can and must be a key to the success of the treaty implementation, to an effective implementation. We believe that the lessons learned and the systemic thinking that trade officials deal with on a daily basis will certainly be useful in the implementation phase of the future treaty. And as I mentioned, an effective implementation, as it has been for other MEAs in the past. We're working around 3 work streams, cross-cutting issues such as transparency, technical assistance, international cooperation, but also reduction to tackle plastic pollution. And when we talk about reduction, we address harmful and unnecessary plastics with a view on how to reduce those plastics. And promoting trade to tackle plastic pollution, such as trade in non-plastic substitutes, alternatives, services, and technologies. And as my colleague from Human Rights mentioned, environmentally sound and safe services, technologies, substitutes, and alternatives as for other products that have been mentioned that we address in the dialogue. Let me give you concrete examples of our work. Under cross-cutting work stream, for instance, better understanding of trade flows of plastics is necessary, and this supports informed decision-making of our members. Trade data is far from complete here, as many goods with embedded plastics don't show in our data. They are not accounted in our statistics or when they are traded. So increasing transparency of trade flows of plastics like single-use plastics, plastic films, and hard-to-recycle plastics is important. In the dialogue, we're exploring cooperation on statistic approaches that could be a cost-efficient way to improve that. Another example following efforts by the dialogue and other stakeholders is the work with the World Customs Organization that has started discussing how to better identify plastics that are embedded in traded goods, single-use plastics and other plastic goods in the context of the ongoing 2028 review of the harmonized system. This was started by a request of the dialogue in the past years as a need in terms to have this information and better identification on specific goods. Of course, the work in the WCO has its own mandate and procedures within the WCO. Another important part is to improve the capacity of developing countries to use trade as a tool to tackle plastic pollution. In the dialogue, what we are doing is facilitating coordination of trade-related technical assistance and capacity building activities through a matchmaking mechanism, putting in relation assistance providers with technical experts and recipients. We have been successful with matchmaking, for example, projects with the World Bank and GIZ with countries such as Mozambique and Morocco and others. But which is important here is that this mechanism, which is a matchmaking exercise, takes into consideration the priorities by developing countries and matching them with what exists. But certain providers have been able to match and to adapt certain projects to the needs of developing countries. Under the reduction work stream, members have taken measures to reduce plastics that are harmful to the environment and or human health, or unnecessary single-use plastics and plastic packaging, and will continue to explore this, how measures can help to reduce these plastics, as I mentioned, harmful and unnecessary. In the dialogue, we look into trade-related plastic measures such as technical regulations or specifications bans, provisions, import and export licenses, internal taxes, or EPR schemes, all of them trade policy tools that we use daily in our countries. By 2023, the survey we conducted showed that 85 members have adopted 223 measures. The environment database of the WTO is a useful tool, for example, to keep track of these measures related to plastics. But with the survey, what we did, we take one step further, asking members what they are doing in this regard. We also noted the opportunity for greater alignment and interoperability, an opportunity for enhanced cooperation, including regionally, between different trade measures, starting with single-use plastic measures. We're exchanging experiences in this area. Under the promotion workstream, trade policies and measures facilitating trade of safe and sustainable substitutes and alternatives to plastics helps moving away from single-use plastics and unnecessary plastics. In the dialogue, we highlighted the importance of promoting trade in non-plastic substitutes, alternatives, services, and technologies. Some private sector stakeholders have stressed how harmonization and in particular, harmonizing standards would help to reduce cost for plastic substitutes. I will conclude by highlighting that the dialogue inclusive approach involving members, as well as the stakeholders from the private sector, civil society, international organizations, and academia, to support discussion through technical expertise, experience, and transparency is key, and is one of the few, pioneer in including, this dialogue is pioneer in including stakeholders in the WTO. As you know, in the WTO, we have member conversations, member negotiations only. Being this a dialogue, we have included stakeholders since the beginning, and we have been pioneer on that. A number of these organizations are based in Geneva, and I recognize some of them here, a lot of friends that have contributed with their expertise. They are here in the room today. I would like to thank them for their valuable contributions. And on behalf of the 6 coordinators, Australia, Barbados, Fiji, China, Morocco, of course, Ecuador, let's continue to work together towards ending plastic pollution with trade means. Thank you so much. And thanks again for inviting Ecuador and the dialogue on plastic pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Garcia, for your thoughtful reflections and your examples that you stated. I would now like to kindly ask my colleague M to pass the baton to the next speaker. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Manal Azi. She's the Global Team Lead on Occupational Safety and Health Policy at the International Labour Organization. The International Labour Organization, also known as the ILO, plays a vital role in addressing the often overlooked risks of plastic pollution within the world of work, particularly the impacts faced by workers across the plastics life cycle, from production and processing to waste management and informal recycling. The ILO has been a leading voice in advocating for the integration of occupational health and safety considerations into global environmental governance, ensuring that the rights and protections of workers remain central to sustainable development efforts. Their work emphasizes the need for just transition and decent work conditions in any future policies addressing the plastics crisis. In light of your extensive experience on occupational safety within global policy frameworks, Mrs. Azi, may I ask, what do you see as the essential elements that would make the Plastics Treaty both effective and meaningful? And how can Geneva's expertise contribute to ensuring its successful implementation? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonas. You've said it all. And thank you for inviting the ILO, and it's very good to see all my colleagues that we meet on other environmental and hazardous exposures. And I'd like to, of course, echo a lot of what was said by the World Health Organization and by my colleagues from the Human Rights Agency as well. So I think we've established that the plastics crisis is not just an environmental issue, it's a human rights issue, it's a decent work issue, it's an issue for the safety and health of workers globally, millions of workers actually. So we know that it's estimated that tens of millions of workers are exposed to hazardous components of plastics during extraction, production, packaging, transport, recycling, and disposal. It's also imperative that to recognize that plastics are composed of chemicals, chemical components, and I think that was mentioned earlier. If we look at just manufacturing alone of plastics, workers encounter up to 2,000 hazardous chemicals during that process. We know that over 1 million of workers also die annually from these exposures. So we look at workers across the supply chain, and they're not only exposed to the chemical hazards, but also to biological hazards, psychosocial risks, climate hazards, such as extreme heat and air pollution, among many others. So to be effective and to be meaningful, and to come back to your question, Jonas, the treaty must explicitly include measures that protect all workers across the entire life cycle. And I'll mention 6 particular points. We suggest to have a standalone provision on occupational safety and health, which covers workers both in the formal economy and the informal economy. This should be in all relevant parts of the text and in the preamble. It concerns chemicals production, plastics production, production of new and or substituting materials, but also recycling and waste management, and should include alternative business models. So for me right now, as the text stands after the last negotiations, it's a bit concerning to see that occupational safety and health has been removed. And there is a very brief mention of health in general, which also risks to be removed. So I was happy to hear my colleague from the World Health Organization remind us, how this affects human health across the life cycle. My second point would be there should be a standalone provision on just transition that was mentioned by my colleague from Human Rights. The just transition, which aligns with ILO definition. These are definitions that take a long time in negotiations and to be adopted. So it should include all workers throughout the supply chain, in all forms of employment, as well as in broader communities. So a just transition really aims to ensure that no one is left behind. So it can't be applied to just one particular affected group. 3, an explicit reference to the ILO labor standards. The labor standards already exist and they're legally binding. We know of the Occupational Safety and Health Conventions 155, 187 that have become fundamental principles and rights. We also know of the key ILO Convention on Chemicals 170 that already exists and is ratifiable. So an explicit mention of these legally binding standards can help ensure safe and healthy working environments for all the people across the life cycle involved in plastic production. 4, the text should build upon a rights-based approach. Safety and health should be recognized explicitly as a fundamental right for all workers involved in plastic pollution, in handling, recycling, and disposal. Worker representation and consultation aligned with ILO's tripartite framework must be embedded. This will ensure more legitimacy and more effectiveness. 5, an explicit reference to the ILO as a key agency for international collaboration and cooperation on world of work issues to ensure coherence, alignment with other UN processes. And we know that the Minamata Convention, for example, already does that in Article 16. So if we want to ensure in implementation, if we want to be able to leverage ILO's mechanisms and standards and our constituency, we need to have that explicit reference in the actual treaty. My last point for the treaty text itself would be to establish transparent system, and I think that was also mentioned earlier, for ongoing monitoring and reporting and accountability. That could include safety and health indicators, occupational safety and health indicators, and compliance with the ILO international labor standards to respond to these occupational safety and health hazards effectively. One of the things we notice a lot is with all these parallel processes, we tend to reinvent the wheel and try to find ways to address some of these issues. But there are established systems that exist that we just need to leverage or reference or mention, and as my colleagues also pointed to. To your last part of the question, how do we implement this and what do we bring to the table to implement this? The ILO, as many of you know, brings together governments, mainly ministries of labor. So this discussion is not just for ministries of environment, but also health, but labor, rights, and other sectors that are very much involved if we want to reach the aim to beat this plastic pollution and the broader discussion. Behind the plastic production is livelihoods, is businesses, is private sector. The ILO brings to the table not only ministries of labor, but employers that represent organizations around the world. They need to be part of this if we aim to have it implemented effectively. And also workers and the representatives, their unions, their sectoral unions. So this is what our ILO constituency brings to the table. That will allow that if we respect workers' rights, that will ensure workplace practicability and effective implementation. The last point would be these conventions that I mentioned earlier. They're not aspirational guidelines. They're legally binding conventions. They exist and they are ratifiable. So we urge governments and others, those who haven't ratified them, to do so. And this treaty can leverage those conventions. Not only are they legally binding, but we already have a system in place, a supervisory mechanism system that includes reporting processes and other forms of expert committees that review the implementation of these conventions. So by including reference to these conventions, we can leverage these compliance frameworks. And this also will allow the ILO to provide the technical assistance needed for countries to review their national legal frameworks and to put in place national safety and health systems and other broader labor systems that can effectively implement the treaty. I leave you with this, and I think all the copies have ended. We had a few. It describes a bit the world of work and plastics relationship and effective solutions that we can have that the ILO has published recently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manal. May I kindly ask my colleague Jonas to pass the baton to the next speaker? So it's now my pleasure to welcome Sonia Peña Moreno, Director of the Center for Policy and Law at the International Union for Conservation of Nature, also known as IUCN. We're delighted to have you with us, so thank you for joining. So IUCN, as a co-convener of the Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues, is a leading voice in the global fight against plastic pollution. During one of such dialogues, IUCN advances commitments by proposing this inclusion of a dedicating article on biodiversity in the forthcoming international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. As plastics found in nature have become an increasing threat to both biodiversity and ecosystems, there is a need to address the full range of impacts plastic as an ecosystem, not just on human health and on waste management. IUCN is helping to ensure that nature remains at the heart of global solutions. So drawing on your leadership in environmental policy and law, Ms. Peña Moreno, I would like to ask you, in your perspective, what needs to be included in the treaty to make it effective and meaningful, and how can the expertise in Geneva contribute to the implementation of the future treaty? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marine. You said a lot of what I have in my speaking notes. But thank you very much for the invitation to join today's World Environment Day celebration. So as you said, IUCN, which stands for International Union for Conservation of Nature, from the outset of the INC and the negotiations towards the adoption of a new plastics treaty and representing the voice of nature in these negotiations, has continuously emphasized that including considerations around conservation of biodiversity within the treaty is absolutely essential. IUCN underlines the need to address the fundamental connections between plastic pollution, biodiversity loss, human health, and many others as intertwined issues. To end plastic pollution, embedding nature and people as allies within the text of the treaty will be critical and a critical step towards achieving global biodiversity targets, the Sustainable Development Goals, the commitments already embedded in the High Seas Treaty and in other MEAs, such as the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. Thus, to respond to the first part of your question, a future plastics treaty must be science-based and include, first, a reference to all phases of the plastics life cycle. We have heard already that from many speakers, from extraction, production, reuse, recycle, to waste management and end of life, as set out in the UNIA Resolution 5/14. Second, a reference to protection of biodiversity and ecosystems from legacy and future plastic pollution as a standalone article or in combination with the article perhaps on health, considering a One Health approach. This is consistent with the latest Conference of the Parties decisions of the Convention on Biological Diversity and in line with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And third, a specific article relating to international cooperation and coordination between the treaty's governance body and the governance mechanisms for other multilateral environmental agreements, such as the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions that we heard about already, and for instance, the Global Biodiversity Framework and relevant international law and organizations. So for these specific articles, IUCN and its World Commission on Environmental Law would suggest language that is keeping with previous proposals made by member states in the INC process and with elements in existing MEAs, their subsequent adopted decisions in their Conference of the Parties or governance bodies, and implementing frameworks. Such language could be either reinserted or inserted as an article in the negotiating text for INC 5.2, or included in a revised iteration of Article 12 on capacity building, technical assistance, and technology transfer, including international cooperation, as well as in Article 19 on the health aspects. To turn to the second part of the question, IUCN advocates for a comprehensive approach to addressing plastic pollution and emphasizes the need to link different pollution treaties and other MEAs, as well as organizations, to work collaboratively and collective together. Urgently, there is a need for interconnectivity, cooperation, regime convergence to address interlinked issues such as human rights, trade, biodiversity, and health that are cross-cutting with the future plastics treaty. Again, we have heard about many of those aspects already. In the immediate, the expertise here in Geneva, with the many organizations that are around the table and many more, can come together to help create or continue creating momentum for a full life cycle focused treaty. Through informal and formal dialogues, increased coordinated advocacy and communications efforts, International Geneva can assist in solidifying regime convergence and sharing of information, data and knowledge between science organizations, MEA secretariats, many others, including the private sector, to ensure that the plastics treaty is effectively laid out and, more importantly, implemented and actioned upon once adopted. So we need a plastics treaty that is practical, innovative, that responds to existing potential concerns linked to plastic pollution. In particular, we see that we should continue to call for alignment between future national action plans to tackle plastic pollution and existing planning mechanisms such as the NBSAP's National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, for example. So I don't see it as far-fetched that through the broad expertise here in Geneva, an innovative, bold partnership and approach to foster international cooperation in knowledge and, why not, financing, can emerge and help to make implementation of the plastics treaty more immediate, impactful. So to conclude, let me mention that IUCN, as a leading provider of biodiversity knowledge, tools, and standards, and a wealth of project experience on the ground that is vested in the different programs and regions of IUCN. Examples include of very important work carried out through the project, for instance, on AfriPac, Island Plast, and many others. And I hope that you had a chance to go and check in the forum across the hall some of those examples. So we are committed then to support conservation planning, legislation, contribute to the discussions framing the content of the future plastics treaty, and also support countries in its implementation and rollout. But we cannot do this alone, and I'm going to echo what other speakers have said. Together, this can be made possible as part of this fantastic Geneva Environment Network. Happy World Environment Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moreno. May I kindly now ask my colleague Marine to pass the baton to the next speaker. It's now my pleasure to introduce Efrain Gomez, the Global Director for Global Policy Impact at WWF International. WWF, as a leading conservation organization, collaborates with people around the world to develop and deliver innovative solutions that protect communities, wildlife, and the places in which they live, including from plastic pollution. Through activism, advocacy, information sharing, WWF has been calling for collective action from the public, the private sector, and governments to achieve the shared goal of a future where there are no plastics in nature. More specifically, the WWF has been clear that to end the plastics crisis, the UN Plastic Pollution Treaty must introduce new global binding rules to regulate production and consumption. In light of your extensive expertise in policy matters, Mr. Gomez, I would like to then ask you, what in your view is essential for the Plastics Treaty to be effective and meaningful? And again, how can Geneva's expertise contribute to its successful implementation? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jonas, and very happy to greet all colleagues and also grateful for this invitation to speak. And first of all, saluting also, of course, the leadership by Republic of Korea, Switzerland, and Ecuador, and many others who have joined us here from states, but also other stakeholders. So I thought, thanks for your question, Jonas, I thought that I would offer a bit into this panel an espresso with several shots, and they consist of several shots that speak to the unity that we believe that are required to achieve a successful treaty later in August. And maybe, who knows, they can take us through these late nights of negotiations for the outcome that we need. And the first is unity in recognition, right? We need to recognize that today we're sitting here and 30,000 tons of plastic pollution will reach our oceans. And this is World Environment Day, and we're just a couple of days out from the UN Oceans Conference in Nice shortly. And secondly, we also need to have the second shot is the unity in ambition, which in treaty terms, of course, is the scope. And just like others, we have some key demands, must-haves that we think that we need for a treaty that actually matches the scale of the crisis that we're facing. And the first one is, of course, naturally on the life cycle, and importantly, both to cover production and consumption and everything in between. The second component that we believe is essential is, of course, a global ban and the phase out of the most harmful and problematic products and chemicals. The third one is a global product design requirements and systems for transition that we require. Fourth one is aligned financial flows and resources. And the fifth is effective governance, decision-making and implementation, accountability. They all relate to the points that were eloquently put by Michael, Daniela, Manal, Sonia in this panel. And so it's easy for us also to second those requests. My third espresso shot is, of course, the unity in strength and momentum. We need to recognize that we had a group of countries, an overwhelming majority, who wanted to move forward from Busan. And this is something that we all collectively need to build on as we move to early August. And the last shot then is, of course, of unity in direction. In this current multilateral environment, you can occasions hear people saying the best shouldn't stand in the way of the possible. In the case of this treaty, that is true, but it's not true. It doesn't relate to who should move forward. It relates to who should move forward and not to whether we should, right? This is something also that we need to keep in mind as we move towards August. It will be a demanding time for us collectively, but WWF stands ready to support everyone who wants to achieve an ambitious enough treaty. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gomez. And may I now kindly ask my colleague M to bring the baton to our next speaker, Margherita Puccino, whom I have the pleasure to welcome to this panel. So Margherita Puccino is the Global Metrics and Roadmaps Lead at the Global Plastic Action Partnership of the World Economic Forum, also known as GPAP. And GPAP is the platform for translating plastic pollution commitments into concrete action. We're eager to hear your perspective from your unique standpoint of bringing public, private, and civil society leaders together to develop joint solutions to the plastic pollution crisis that are both pragmatic and ambitious. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And thank you for having me here today. Let me start saying that, first of all, the treaty is a truly exciting opportunity for transformation. The UNEA resolution that launched this negotiation is unprecedented, not only for its ambitions, so to cover the full life cycle of plastic, but also in this very short time frame for reaching an agreement. At GPAP, Global Plastic Action Partnership, we believe that addressing plastic pollution requires a systemic, holistic change because we need to transition to a circular plastic economy, which means rethinking how we design, how we produce, use, and manage plastic. This means ensuring that all stakeholders are part of the solution, including governments, the private sector, civil society, and informal sector. What shape or form the treaty will ultimately take, this is of course a political decision for member states to take. And as a neutral platform and observer of the process, GPAP is not here to advocate for any particular outcome, but from our experience, there are 5 elements that could help enable real change. So first of all, the treaty could benefit from clarity on how countries can take action at national level. GPAP currently is supporting 25 countries tackling plastic pollution by helping them establishing baseline, develop evidence-based roadmap, and engaging stakeholders. This experience has shown us that progress is possible, and this progress helps building confidence across government and sectors. Second, a transformation of this scale requires significant investments. A clear financial architecture within the treaty could help unlock both public and private financing and encourage synergies across funding sources. Third, sustained support for innovation and scaling solutions would be essential, particularly for technologies and business models that can shift plastic economy towards circularity. I'm talking about in terms of removing barriers and aligned incentives. Fourth, the treaty should seek to work in harmony with other multilateral environmental agreements, as it was mentioned several times this morning, to avoid duplication and promote synergies. And finally, and this is the scientist in me speaking, in my opinion, there is a real opportunity here to build a strong monitoring and reporting mechanism, not only to track progress, but also to build trust and facilitate learning and encourage continuous improvement, allowing the treaty to evolve and strengthen itself over time, much like the Paris Agreement has done previously. And if I'm asked how Geneva can contribute to this, the more I look at Geneva, the more I look at Switzerland, the more I live in this country, I'm from Italy originally, I see a vibrant and diverse ecosystem of international organizations. I see technical bodies, I see NGOs and policy experts. All this collective expertise that spans from multilateral coordination, scientific knowledge, and capacity building. All of this is vital for a treaty that needs to work across national context. And as an example from our work at GPAP, we're hosting a finance coordination group. This serves as a hub for dialogue, again, on finance solution. This group brings together stakeholders to align on effort, sharing knowledge, and we really aim to ensure that the finance for treaty implementation is coherent, is accessible, and responsive to the country needs. In Geneva, I truly believe that our strength is facilitating relationship and partnership, knowledge exchange that can also help countries move from commitment to action, providing platforms for learning, collaboration, and ongoing support throughout the treaty lifecycle. And like other host countries, we're deeply appreciative of Switzerland's commitment and leadership in supporting this process and helping creating the condition for a successful and inclusive INC. From a personal perspective, I want to thank all the negotiators that are working very hard on this to bring this agreement home. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Margarita, for your insights. And now may I kindly ask our colleague to bring the baton all the way here to this side of the table as we now turn and welcome Carolyn Deer-Birkbeck, Executive Director of the Forum on Trade, Environment, and the SDGs, also known as TESS. We've already heard today that plastic pollution is a global problem which requires a global response. We've already heard so many things about the work here in Geneva and beyond, showing how international cooperation to address the plastic crisis has been increasing over the past year. The evidence is clear and the momentum is rising. So, a co-convener of the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues, the TESS Forum has been at the forefront of various processes, fostering and supporting international cooperation to support the multitude of global efforts to end plastic pollution. With the wealth of experience you have, Ms. Deer-Birkbeck, I now hand you over the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Geneva Environment Network for organizing this important dialogue today. So we've heard today about the complexity of tackling plastic pollution. We've heard that it requires a very comprehensive approach. We've seen the dynamism and engagement of stakeholders here in Geneva, but also all over the world. We've also heard a strong commitment to multilateralism as a pathway for inclusive, coordinated, and effective global action. But as we move to the final stages of the treaty process, we've been very much involved in supporting governments and stakeholders in this process. I'm struck that we may need to step back and remind ourselves about why we are talking about an international treaty as an instrument for cooperation. There are many different forms of cooperation that governments and stakeholders can pursue, but what problems are there that we need an international treaty to solve? And this will help guide us as we're focused on what are the most essential elements as we approach INC 5.2. But first, on the problems to solve, I'm going to take a small risk here and ask for some audience participation. I'd like you to raise your hands if you've ever come back from the supermarket being annoyed about how much unnecessary packaging you will have to take to the recycling on the weekend. Who has then taken that rubbish to the recycling, knowing that deep down, the great majority of it will not be recycled or will be shipped somewhere else in the world? Who is frustrated that there are not more products, including plastic products, that we can reuse and repair? And who has a child or a grandchild and been grateful that there are regulations ensuring BPA-free plastic bottles? I certainly have. Who's wondered how many other things there are on the market that also have dangerous chemicals that may harm human health or your children? And who can imagine, someone here mentioned earlier, who can imagine a world where we have not just double, but triple the amount of plastics in our world, and where we know that we can't have waste management capacity that will keep up? The evidence is clear on that. And two more questions. Who can imagine the frustration of countries facing a tide of plastic pollution that's not generated in their own shores, but comes through their rivers and through their oceans from other places? And who's bought a product produced or packaged in another country, realizing that if you want to see change, you'll have to influence governments and regulators in another jurisdiction. You'll have to influence companies far, far away in the world if you want to have that change. And that's a position that many, many countries in the world are in. So we have some of these shared problems. So as a political economist, when I think about international cooperation on plastic pollution, or indeed any environmental issue, I start by trying to understand the root causes of the problem we're trying to solve. Where are the real blockages and stumbling blocks? And then where exactly is international cooperation required? So my reflection is that there are two core challenges as we seek to conclude an agreement at INC 5.2. The first challenge is that plastic pollution problem is not only an environmental problem, it's an economic issue. It's about transforming the economy. It's about tackling patterns of consumption and production of plastics that are unsustainable and not consistent with the goal of protecting human health and the environment from pollution. Advancing this kind of systems change will generate complex political challenges domestically in all countries and internationally. The more ambitious the treaty is, the more political will we will need to find ways to recognize and address these economic and political dimensions. So when we think about international cooperation, we need to think about how we can pursue cooperation that is ambitious and effective, but that is also fair and that accounts for varying national capacities and circumstances. So what problems will a treaty specifically help us to solve? So looking back at the literature and the history of MEAs, countries have agreed to treaties when they can't solve problems alone. So they use them when there's an advantage to working collectively than just unilaterally or bilaterally. They use them to address transboundary problems that they can't solve alone. They use them as a way to structure and coordinate collective action over time, including in regard to complex transboundary supply chains. They use them when common international rules and guidance will help governments and companies, that will reduce the fragmentation of a range of different national regulations, that undermine incentives for business to scale up action and generate change. Countries also seek international treaties where they rely on regulatory action in their neighbouring countries in order to achieve their own domestic goals. So having said that, what do we need from a legally binding instrument this August? We need a treaty with a clear objective of protecting human health, we've heard that clearly today, as well as the environment from plastic pollution. We need a treaty that establishes shared goals that can guide government action everywhere, nationally, and send signals to markets. We need a treaty that provides common global rules and guidance addressing the full life cycle of plastics. And we'll need to do this in a way that provides flexibility and sensitivity to different circumstances. We need a treaty that's dynamic and can evolve over time. We need a treaty that can increase transparency of the actions governments are taking and of the material composition of plastic products. We need a treaty to improve availability of data for all countries so they can assess and review progress over time. And we need a treaty that provides ambitious support for implementation. So with just 2 months, 9 weeks, in fact, until INC 5.2, a key priority for all is to really focus on the essential elements that we need now to provide a framework for cooperation that is dynamic, that will enable countries to evolve and adjust the treaty over time based on new information. So the key now is that we need to look for common ground on a treaty that is ambitious, effective, and fair, and that will set the kind of framework that will last for decades ahead. This is not a treaty for the next 2 years, it's a treaty for several decades. So with very best wishes for our collective success in this regard, I pass the baton now to Jane Monkey. No, I don't pass the baton. No, I just say thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so no, indeed, Jane is very soon joining us online, actually. And before we move to Jane and to the closing, I would like to highlight that our local authorities could not be with us this morning. The city of Geneva is, as we are speaking, having its first administrative council meeting with the new elected co-mayors. This is for the city of Geneva. We are nevertheless joined by the Global Cities Hub. So let me kindly ask Caroline to pass the baton to the co-director of the Global Cities Hubs, Mrs. Camelia Kemileva, who is also representing here the local and subnational governments coalition to end plastic pollution. Ms. Kemileva, you have 30 seconds to provide some insights here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have to thank to you, so taking 5 seconds already. So I speak today on behalf of the Global Cities Hub and the coalition you mentioned of subnational governments to end plastic pollution, which gathers over 100 local and regional governments from all over the world that have endorsed our joint efforts. So as we have 2 minutes, as I have a simple question, and to add what Caroline said, you explained what treaty we need. I would add just, we need a treaty that will be implemented. Certainly, national governments are negotiating the treaty and will play a key role, but many aspects of the implementation of this treaty, such as waste management, recycling, enforcement of new standards, name it, will have directly to fall on the shoulders of the local and regional governments. And these are their core responsibilities everywhere in the world. Another important but often overlooked point, which was mentioned by ILO, is that the treaty leads to the phase out of certain plastic industries, including but not limited to local factories, but also schools, hospitals, and others, where the municipalities who will be faced with managing the social consequences of this implementation, including the reintegration of workers who may lose their jobs. So these are just 2 examples. And to conclude,
We have two main messages to all member states. Member states represent the whole of government, this is true, but in this treaty, we would like you please to keep and strengthen the language that already refers to local and subnational governments in the treaty, as they are implementers of the treaty together, shoulder to shoulder with national governments. And we will continue to submit concrete language to facilitate your life of negotiators. Proposal to support this effect. It is not only important to send a signal to national legislators who will be tasked with implementing the treaty at home, but also essential for the future secretariat of this instrument to be mandated and resourced to work directly with local and regional governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camelia, for your thoughtful words. We will now move from the Geneva scene to discuss another major global issue, the liquidation of stocks of ecological resources and Earth Overshoot Day. Let me now give the floor to Jane Munke, Managing Director and Chief Scientific Officer at the Food Packaging Forum. Beating plastics pollution and reducing humanity's ecological footprint is not only an ecological matter, but also a global health matter. As Earth Overshoot Day is falling earlier every year, it is critical to raise awareness on humanity's ecological footprint, but also to ensure sustainable practices, such as avoiding overconsumption. We have the pleasure of having Jane with us to announce this year's Overshoot Day. Jane, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good morning. I hope you can hear and see me. And I took the liberty of handing myself the baton because I didn't want to miss out on the fun. So good morning. Thank you to Korea and Switzerland and Geneva, of course, and to the team of Jen for the kind invitation and for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you today. So I'm an environmental scientist, but for the last 18 years, I've been focusing on how to protect human health from the adverse health impacts and toxicity of chemicals in our daily lives. And I'm also a member of the Scientist Coalition for an Effective Plastics Treaty. I would love to see the Global Plastics Treaty beat all plastic pollution for good, both in the environment and in us humans. Plastics are very common, but also incredibly useful materials that we've learned to depend on, be it for our healthcare, agriculture, fisheries, food packaging, textiles, buildings, mobility, communication, and so on. But plastics, we know that, are chemically complex materials. They are not inert. They contain more than 16,000 chemicals that can and do leach out of plastic products while we use them. In fact, this diffusion of plastic chemicals happens quite rapidly, which means that we all are exposed to plastic chemicals from the plastic products we surround ourselves with throughout our entire lifetimes via air, food, and drinking water. So that plastic taste when you drink from a sports bottle is not just imagined, it's the taste of plastic chemicals leaching into your drink. But what is more, plastics also shed micro and nanoplastics, and this too happens during the normal and intended use of the materials, not only when plastics become pollution and start breaking down in the environment. So for this year's World Environment Day celebration, I invite you to reflect not only on how we will beat plastic pollution in the environment for good, but to also think about the fantastic opportunity for preventing chronic disease by reducing plastic pollution in your own life, by reducing the plastic chemicals, the hazardous plastic chemicals and particles that you're exposed to without knowing, because health impacts of those plastic chemicals that have been thoroughly tested, it's about 800, point towards fertility issues, metabolic disorders, cardiovascular disease, brain-related disorders, impacts on the immune system, and cancers. The facts are clear. At least 1,396 plastic chemicals from food contact materials have been detected in people. And for at least 1,481 plastic food contact chemicals, we have evidence that they transfer into food, making human exposure very probable. And what is more, new studies are showing reliably that micro and nanoplastics originate from plastic food packaging and food processing equipment during their normal and intended use. So this emerging science, I think, will be an even stronger motivation for reducing our societal dependence on plastics. But we don't need to wait for more scientific certainty to act. Maybe you are now wondering, how is this possible? Don't we test all chemicals and materials before they are placed on the market? Well, the short answer is no. The long answer is scientific understanding of how chemicals impact human health and ecosystems has evolved in parallel with our societal dependence on plastic. But we cannot accuse previous generations of negligence. Our continued reliance on plastics, especially for food packaging, is just that. Right now, it's an active ignoring of reality. It's the equivalent of a 5-year-old sticking their fingers in their ears while Mother Earth is telling them to listen. So let's not be that 5-year-old anymore. Let's be the adults in the room. Let's realize that in addition to choking our beautiful green blue planet with a plastic pollution tide that cannot be stemmed by beach cleanups and improved waste management alone, as we've heard from many speakers this morning, we are toxifying our very selves. We're making ourselves unhealthy and discounting our future, the future of our children and of our grandchildren. And I ask you, who wants an action in the face of this reality? I can't see the show of hands, but I'm assuming no hands are up. So speaking of Mother Earth, I have the huge honor of recently having joined the Global Footprint Network, and that is, of course, known for calculating Earth Overshoot Day. Earth Overshoot Day is the day of the year on which humanity's demand on nature exceeds the Earth's annual biological capacity to regenerate. So in 2025, Earth Overshoot Day falls on July 24th, meaning that between January 1st and July 24th, humanity's demand for biological regeneration is equivalent to the planet's entire annual regeneration. In 2024, in case you're curious, the official Earth Overshoot Day was on August 1st, 8 days later than this year's Earth Overshoot Day. And that has to do with improved historical data sets as revised by UN and para-UN agencies, shifting the date 7 days earlier. And the trend from 2024 to 25 from humanity's consumption and biocapacity availability shifts the date 1 day earlier. But what's important now is that we humans are over-consuming our natural resources, and our dependence on plastic is a huge contributor. So let's face the facts. We urgently need a treaty with globally binding measures and adequate financing to achieve a reduction. We urgently need a treaty that reduces plastic production and consumption to sustainable levels that help to move the date of Earth Overshoot Day back. And we need a treaty that uses modern and independent science free from conflict of interest to assess chemical safety of plastics, of its alternatives and substitutes from a full life cycle perspective. And for those uses that are essential for society, and phase out the most problematic plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastic products to safeguard human health. And importantly, let's harness science to avoid solutions that become tomorrow's problems and to protect human and environmental health from the adverse health impacts and toxicity of chemicals in our daily lives. Thank you so much, and best of luck to the negotiators so that we can move forward with this important work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane, for these insights. So it's now my honor to introduce a video message from the Ambassador Luis Vallas Valdivieso, Ambassador of Ecuador to the United Kingdom and Chair of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. In his role, Ambassador Vallas Valdivieso has been instrumental in steering the global process toward a legally binding agreement. His leadership has helped maintain momentum and inclusivity as we approach the next round of negotiations at INC 5.2. Let's now hear his message.
Good afternoon, dear friends. I would like to thank Geneva Environment Network for this invitation on the occasion of the World Environment Day. This year, 2025, the World Environment Day calls for a collective action to tackle plastic pollution. I would like to acknowledge the hard work being done by member states and observers towards INC 5.2. There is a collective vision to deliver on the mandate of Resolution 514 with an effective international legally binding instrument. I know you have had a busy morning full of high-level dialogue that is also a response to that call I mentioned. INC 5.2 is exactly 2 months away, and it is critical to maintain the momentum we have. Once again, my gratitude to the Geneva Environment Network for the organization and the invitation to this event. I wish you a good day. Thank you.
So we are now coming to the closing of this event, and I'm kindly ask my colleague Jonas to bring the baton back to the center of the table to His Excellency Ambassador Felix Wertli. His Excellency will be heading the Swiss delegation at the August negotiation and will now add a few words to close the celebration.
Thank you very much, Tiana, and thank you to all the colleagues who made so important and meaningful contributions. Perhaps a few takeaways from my side. I think that's not surprisingly, we have heard over and over again this morning the need why we need such a global treaty that's effective and help us to end plastic pollution. We have heard about the nature we have to, the goals we have to achieve, but also about the transboundary characteristic of this problem. We have heard many actors explaining how their mission, how their work relates to this problem, to this challenge. And I have to admit, sometimes almost a bit overwhelming, when you hear it's such a large issue and so many issues are connected. But the good side is there's so many solutions, what we have heard this morning. We have heard existing work is going on. We have heard that existing guidelines are there. We have heard, for example, WTO colleagues, how much interest is also there from the trade side to contribute to solve the issues, and also that a lot of things exist already. I think one point to take away, I think it was Daniela mentioned that we need a whole of government approach, but also a whole of international community approach. And perhaps also what I mentioned before, sometimes you're almost a bit overwhelmed because we have also heard we have to address this issue and other issues that has to be taken into account. I think also we need an absolute and effective treaty that helps us to tackle this huge issue, the important issue. But also, I think many years back, we had a slogan in the publicity that was reduced to the max. I think it's important that we remind ourselves in the negotiations in Geneva in August, we have to get a treaty. But that is like a very first step also to establish the whole mechanism. With a treaty, you establish the framework, the rules, the measures. But we have also time to further develop guidance. For example, we have COP decisions that will come up and specify certain elements. So, for example, the treaty has to enable us to stress and enhance international cooperation, cooperation among national organizations, collaboration with international organizations to tackle the plastic pollution. But we don't have to define each and every element in detail. This you can also then develop further by guidance and COP decisions. Another important point to take with me is about the whole implementation. So we have to make sure that the treaty text is implementable. That means that the measures are clear, that they're also applicable to all, and where countries, in particular since have challenges to implement them, that we're able to support them. That means we need a treaty that has on the national level measures that account for the national circumstances, specific considerations, and we need measures on a global level. Global level to address the transboundary nature of this, but also that know that we have to trigger a lot of investments, of research, of innovation, and we have to send the right policy signals to get there. We have to trigger investments. And this we can do when a treaty text develops the development of standards, for example, when it develops investments, particularly from the private sector on infrastructure, but also on research and investments to bring up new solutions to enhance, reduce recycling, but also for sure reducing the need for plastics. I have to admit I'm highly even more motivated than I was before coming in to conclude those negotiations in Geneva in August. We are fully committed. We have heard from WWF that we need some espressos to get over the night. You might know a few weeks back we had the Eurovision Song Contest in Switzerland. I thought that espresso is now replaced by espresso macchiato. But whatever we like, if it's espresso, espresso macchiato or tea, I'm very convinced that those colleagues coming to Geneva to work together will bring along their political will, their commitment to do so, to bring us over the finishing line and enable us a treaty that we're all proud of and that enables us to beat plastic pollution. Thank you very much for being here today and looking forward to keep in touch on this important issue.